Hello and welcome to Dialogue. The 60th edition of the Munich Security Conference has concluded here in Germany. At the world leading forum for debating international security policy, the conference aims to help decision makers address the world's most pressing security concerns, from the wars in Ukraine to Gaza to conflicts in the Horn of Africa. How to maintain global stability at a time when different but interlinked conflicts are unfolding simultaneously. Is the world falling into a zero-sum mindset with more countries ending up in the lose-lose confrontation as warned by the Munich Security Conference? And finally, what can the international community do to cool tensions before it's too late? Joining me in Munich is Comfort Ero, President and CEO of the International Crisis Group. I'm Xu Qinduo. Welcome to Dialogue, Comfort. Again, we are pleased to have you. Let's take a look at the situation in Ukraine, which is really close to the hearts of a lot of people in Munich Security Conference. We know there are agreements from Germany, France with Ukraine providing long-term support, but at the same time, we do see delay or suspense of difficulty in approving more military aid to Ukraine in Washington. So how do you characterize the current status?
I was in Brussels and Washington, D.C. before I came to Munich, and I've been keeping an eye on the passing of various aid packages for Ukraine. And in that sequencing of events, it was crucial that the 50 billion aid package for Ukraine was signed by European heads of states on the 1st of February. It was also instructive that on the eve of the passing of that package, a number of European leaders, led by Chancellor Olaf Scholz, acknowledged in an open letter in the Financial Times that there had been a failure of fulfilling the promises, the commitments that had been made to support Ukraine, both particularly on the military front. And there's been a lot of conversations about making sure that Europe was able to provide the necessary ammunition, the production, and all those things as well. The US was watching very carefully, and the assumption is that Europeans focused on that and dealt with that aid package. It would make it easier for the Biden administration to get the 60 billion of aid supplemental passed the 60 passed on the Washington side. I got into the US, and what is very clear to me is that unlike last year, Ukraine has clearly become a political football in Washington, and that passing that package. And it's not just Ukraine. Israel, Gaza is part of that. Taiwan is part of that. And it's also tied to the southern border. It's tied to the migration issue. It's very clear to me that it's a domestic issue. It's also become part of the electoral campaign. Some on the Republican side, partly because of President Trump, has also said we don't want to give the Biden administration a win. It's very unfortunate that something as strategic, as important, something that has global significance, something that is crucial to the security architecture of the transatlantic relationship can now find itself sort of being caught in that ping pong of the electoral campaign. So we should be worried, we should be concerned. And I think that has shaped and defined a lot of the conversations here at Munich Security Conference. I think it's left a lot of Europeans concerned, and of course the Ukrainians themselves are worried, but the message from Zelensky remains the same, that with or without that support, which you would like to see, Ukraine is going to continue to fight for the defense of its own sovereignty as well. Mm-hmm.
Well, of course, adding to that, we have noticed the signs of a shift in priorities in the European countries. According to the report by the Munich Security Conference, they ask people to list the risks, like 32 of them, and Russia ranks the 7th in Germany, and of course it's a kind of a similar situation in Italy and France. What are behind, what are factors are behind this shift of attitudes here?
I think there are different domestic constraints for each country as well. Europe itself, and there have been various surveys. This is the one that's been done by Munich. another organisation that we are familiar with, the European Council for Foreign Relations, put out their own surveys as well. And there's a sense of anxiety in Europe is their conclusion for them. The issues around climate change and migration, issues particularly around migration is shaping the politics of a number of countries as well. And this is not new. It was very much there. It was there in 2015. It's also what shaped what eventually became Brexit in the UK. And climate change has become very much an order of the conversation today, and some of it's a generational concern, some of it's shaped by the various political makeup of each of the country as well. The fact that that this survey showed that Russia was seventh also says a lot about how Europe itself and how certain European countries read security within the Union. I mean, if you ask the Baltic countries, where do they rank Russia, I think you'll see it closer to the top. I think if you ask Poland where they rank Russia, they may see it closer to the top. So it varies according to the social and political fabric in each of these countries. But there are a number of things that are making Europeans anxious, and it's not lost on us that migration continues to be up there. But I think that also speaks to the policies and the choices that Europe has made vis-à-vis its own external borders as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, there are talks at the Security Conference of increasing defense budget for several countries there. But then, of course, it's like a knee-jerk response, right? If there's you perceive as a risk and you want to increase your own capability. Yeah. But is that ultimate solution, to our security kind of dilemma? Everybody, if A increases defense capability, then B, I mean, they will say, oh, we need to better protect ourselves.
Yeah, look, this is a very sort of worrying time. I think if you look at the entire sort of conflict and geopolitical landscape, more and more desire by leaders to use a military, the military response to address a number of conflicts as well. So we're seeing wars rising in a number of places, and we're seeing leaders preferring to use or seek out a military solution as opposed to diplomacy. In fact, sometimes one is left with the impression that to suggest diplomacy is to suggest that you're weak. To suggest a diplomatic approach means that you do not have the capability to show that you're strong. And yet we haven't come across any conflict that has been sustainable, or any conflict that has been sustainable by just the use of force. And it's very clear to us that any form of negotiated settlement, any sustained peace process requires a very firm, clear path towards negotiation. It requires what we're doing right now, dialogue, putting all the key issues on the table, and it requires you to think through options for deal making. And wherever you've seen any other conflicts, when it's a victor's peace, it's very fragile, and you never really deal in a concrete way with the grievances that are at the heart of that conference.
Mm-hmm. We speak of the public opinion and, of course, and its impact on the policy making on the government level. Is this the year of the elections around the world? And here in the European Union or European Parliament, there will be upcoming elections. There's concern of the rise of populism and nationalism that will lead to probably or possibly the victory of right-wing parties. Is that a concern to you?
Yeah, I mean, it's not new. It's not a new phenomenon. It's been very much there for the last 10 years or so. And it goes back again to the domestic stresses, the anxiety in a number of societies, cost of living, the governance issues, questions about education, questions about equality, and poverty. So all those things are playing out in a number of European countries, and a number of them coming out of the pandemic, seeing a weak economic base. And you've seen all these stresses and anxieties, and not just in Europe. You've seen it in the US, very polarizing sort of domestic environment, very toxic set of politics playing out. And you've seen it elsewhere, but it's front and center of Europe. It's very hard to determine which way it's going. But if you look at a number of the polls, a lot of the sort of assessments that people are suggesting, a sense in which some countries will veer more to the right. What that means in terms of the future of the European Union, in terms of its policies, in terms of the principles, this is going to be a testing year for European Parliament, but it's also going to be a testing year in a number of quarters. It's not just the US or Europe who's having elections. We've seen some of them in other places. So this is a crucial year for sort of the resilience of democracy, democratization, but also of governance and the values that a number of countries used to determine, the fate of the international system. And I think what worries me is whether out of these various elections, we can still guarantee sort of international cooperation, multilateralism, and continue to find ways in which to collaborate to find a peaceful way out of the crises that we're seeing everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Let's have a short break. We'll be back right after this.
What's behind the next door? What motivates us to find the truth? To understand the world, we must see it from different angles. Never stop searching. Go deeper. Go further. Be open-minded. Be engaged. Open the door through dialogue, where ideas do matter.
Welcome back. Speak of the crisis, of course, another one going on is the Gaza crisis. We are seeing, increasing warning, at least from some of the Western countries like Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the recent one. In a sense, they were supposed to be on side, or they are on the side of Israel, but even they can't accept that kind of scenario.
Yeah, I think they've seen...
Will that create pressure also on the US, which is a major backer of Israel?
Yeah, I mean, we've been pretty clear also that this now lays at the door of the United States. If there's any country, despite what we've seen in the last 4 months, despite, I think, America's own frustration behind the scenes, but even publicly airing their frustrations that, Prime Minister Netanyahu, the far right are not listening to them. This is clearly in the quarter of the US to continue to pressure, and not just to say, publicly that you have to stop the fighting, but
but also supplying weapons.
But also supplying weapons as well. So it's a lot has been said about the United States. They played a crucial role in that initial truce. The bear hug of President Biden played a crucial role at the time, but this time I think it's very clear that if this operation goes ahead, it will have devastating consequences on Gaza. There'll be nothing left. The US has tried very hard to prevent an escalation, a regional escalation. So is Israel and so is Iran. Neither side wants to see a war escalating. But if this should continue to go on, the ramifications will go way beyond Gaza, as we've seen today.
Well, you said ramifications. That's a scenario that concerns a lot of people. We talk about Iran, the Red Sea crisis, the Houthi, and also the other militia groups in this region. Of course, the concerns like whether there will be a regional war, or even worse, like the beginning of the World War III. Some people would say, is that? How likely that will come true? How likely? What can be done? To stop that kind of scenario.
Yeah, we warned from the very beginning of the potential for escalation, and in the sense you're there with what you're seeing with the Houthis. But nonetheless, the three of them, Israel, Iran, and the US, have been very clear that they wanted to avert a regional escalation as well. So, and I think making sure that it doesn't get any worse than it is right now is sort of the key focus, and that so far that hasn't played out. The theme of the Munich Security Conference is called lose-lose. Each of these countries will lose if this should get any worse as well. For Iran, it would look pretty bad in terms of what it's also trying to achieve in terms of its own relations with the United States as well. So the message here is de-escalation. But if you want also to de-escalate, you've got to get that cessation of hostilities on the table. It's not lost on any of us that the Houthis have also said that, as part of their pullback, you need to get the cessation of hostilities and the humanitarian aid in. Now, have they gone so far that it will be very difficult to pull them back? I mean, time will tell. But if you don't de-escalate, if you don't get that cessation of hostilities in place, the war is going to continue. The Houthis will continue to see lifeline in their fight as well.
Mm-hmm, that's true. And at the same time, we do see there's questioning of, especially from the global south, from the Western approach toward the Gaza crisis. Well, in this country, Germany, they are one of the strongest supporters of Israel, but other European countries are pretty critical of Israel operation. Plus the global south, they are questioning whether there's a rule-based international order, or practice in Ukraine, or attitudes toward Gaza is different.
Yeah, if it was already on weak and fragile stand in relation to Ukraine, it's certainly further dented that rules-based order. Look, even Europe itself is not unified on its policy. You've seen a number of countries break away and call in very clearly for cessation of hostilities, whether it's Spain or Ireland or Luxembourg as well. And it's not a surprise to us. Some of those countries that have long been supporters and champions of the Palestinian cause, spoke up very, very clearly. I mean, it's very unfortunate because there was a sense in which some of Europe and particularly President Biden had heard the concerns of a number of global South countries, and there were some initiatives that were being taken, but I think now that observation about double standards has become even clearer now within Gaza, and you saw the decision by South Africa to take the case to the ICJ. Yeah. Not a surprise given its own history, but quite frankly, Israel took that seriously. They brought their best lawyers, their best defense people to the court and took that seriously as well. So I don't think it was lost on anybody that, one, South Africa did that, but two, but Israel, recognizing South Africa's own history, came to that court as well with a ready defense of its own operations as well. But it was also an important message from the ICJ and watching what happens next, and the reporting requirements towards Israel are going to be vital in the next coming months as well.
Yeah, that's true. The report out of the security conference is, without the global south, there will not be international security, right? And so obviously, they are paying more attention to the attitudes of the global south. Yeah. But are people concerned at the same time? There's a loss of credibility. Western nations. You don't practice what you say.
Yeah, but it's not. I think all countries are accountable as well. There's been a degree of complacency particularly at the level of the Security Council, the P5, who are the Security Council is the chamber of international peace and security, and all 5 of those countries that are on there are also equally accountable for the state of international relations today. So I wouldn't put all blame on one particular country or a group of particular countries.
Too.
Yeah, that all of them. This is the home of international peace and security, and when a conflict gets caught up in the geopolitical winds as well, each of those permanent 5 have to answer one simple question: in how is it that you weren't able to avert, prevent escalation of a crisis? So it's very easy also to put all the blame on the north and on Western countries, but each player also has a role and has to answer certain questions. The chamber has a number of aggressors in there. It's not just one aggressor, but yeah.
Speak of the big 5. Of course, the U.S. is the only superpower there, and there's the election too, and there's a real prospect of Trump coming back to the White House. What will be the geopolitical ramification or impact in terms of Ukraine, for example, or around the world?
Good question. I mean, it's unpredictable, and I think it's because it's coming from the US. I think a number of people are nervous. I mean, the US has both number one, has a global role, but it can be both positive and negative as well. We've seen in the initial phase of the war in Ukraine and of Russia's aggression on Ukraine that the US was an important unifier. And now we're watching, in the lead up to the elections, how Ukraine has become a political football. We've seen how Gaza has become both a domestic issue, but also at the Security Council, how the US is losing credibility in front of a number of its allies as well. So, we've also seen how the US has become an important sort of player, both assuring and sort of acting as a deterrent player in the Indo-Pacific arena, where China also is an important sort of regional player. So whether you like it or not, the US has both a positive and a negative role, but so do others, depending on the arena in which we're talking about as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, another P5 is China. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi was at the meeting, and he delivered a speech about the Chinese perspective of security, or what kind of role China can play to maintain peace and stability at this period of time. What do you make of his remarks?
Important, and I think it's no surprise. I mean, China wants to be seen as a global player with significant sort of security and peace and security perspectives as well. I think one of the important things for us, and one of the issues that we were watching, was that US-China relationship as well. And I think the last time you and I spoke was on the eve of the San Francisco meeting of both leaders. Important that those two leaders met. It's part of the steps to dealing with the emerging thaw that we've been sort of watching very closely, especially after Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan. So we've been looking for ways in which to sort of lower the temperature, and that was a significant step. The fundamentals that sort of shape the relationship between both countries, they're still very much there, but nonetheless, that reassuring China about US role, bringing on the military-to-military cooperation, dealing with the economic issues that is very much at the center of President Xi Jinping's own concerns. Those are important steps towards lowering the temperature, towards leading to an emerging thaw. But the fundamentals that shape that relationship is still very there. The government doesn't like the way in which the US frames it as strategic competition, but nonetheless, that is a very real relationship. That is a defining feature of the relationship, given both countries' worldviews as well.
One of the concerns, from the Munich Security Report is to avoid, I believe, is a lose-lose scenario.
Yeah.
What do we need to do, especially for the major powers, EU, China, US, and others? What do they need to? What kind of steps they need to take to avoid that kind of worst scenario?
Well, I think cooperation on the big flashpoints, so Ukraine, Israel, Gaza, rebuilding the credibility around diplomacy as well. As I said to you, there's a sense in which diplomacy has been undermined, that it's been shaken to its core. Getting leaders to cooperate and to use the Security Council more effectively, there's a lot of lip service paid to multilateralism, a lot of lip service being paid to peacemaking. And as I speak to you, there's a sense in which we're seeing a crisis of peacemaking, where leaders can get away with it because the tools that would normally pull them back, that would restrain them, are no longer working. So I think we've got to get more consensus building, more coordination, more coming to the table, more averting. A lot of lip service is paid towards prevention, and we've got to do better, get them to think better, and get back to the art of diplomacy, and really doing that heavy lifting to guarantee that we can get towards a sustainable process as well.
One last question. You mentioned about the concern with interdependence. We used to talk about the benefits of being independent. Yeah. But now somehow, we have a changed mentality, or independent, or too much independence on this and that.
Yeah, I think it's largely also to do with pandemic and supply chains. It's also, I think a number of countries are looking that they want to build alliances with key partners, with strategic partners, where they are not, they're no longer dependent or relying on one market, on one country to access goods, products. And I think that is the story that we've been watching in the last 4 or 5 years, that a number of countries are seeing that we've been reliant on one route, one way. And I think a number of countries, even the US, is wanting to diversify and make sure that we don't rely on one country for any of our products. That's one of the consequences and fallout of Ukraine in terms of the energy. You know, you watch Europe looking for other markets in which to get its own oil and natural gases as well. And you've seen it also in the chips as well. You know, trying to get different technology and not relying on one source to be the one that delivers these things as well. So it's still very much interdependent, but I think the interdependence will change in terms of alliances that are being created as well, because we don't want to rely on one place. At least that's the logic of a number of countries.
But at the same time, here at the Munich, people are also talking about growing the pie globally.
Yeah, growing the pie. Look, there's a lot of interesting language that's coming out. And again, I think the pandemic and the climate financing debate has exposed certain realities about the unevenness of the international system. The vaccine diplomacy, or the lack of it, the inability for certain markets, the African market, a number of them watched Europe build up walls. They watched the lack of cooperation, the lack of collaboration, at a time when we needed to sort of work together as an international community to make sure that everybody had access to the vaccines. And I think that has led to suspicion, distrust, and frustration about what multilateralism means if you can't cooperate at a time of a pandemic that knows no borders, that affects everybody as well.
That's true. Well, thank you, Comfort.
Thank you
for speaking with us.
Pleasure.